Okay, welcome back everybody to this supplement lecture in RN50. And this week we've been talking about React. So if you attended the live lecture, you would have seen me talking about React. And I explained quite a few concepts, but the live lecture was honestly kind of like a drink from a fire hose for a lot of the students. And so in these supplement lectures, we're just kind of going through the concepts taught in the live lecture in more detail, one at a time. And there will be a supplement lecture for each concept. So in today's supplement lecture, we're just going to be talking about what is React, how it is declarative programming, and we're going to write our first React app. So let's get started. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about what is React. Well, React is a library popularized by Facebook that leans on JavaScript, and it basically helps you create dynamic and interactive user interfaces and web applications. Now quickly, what is static and dynamic web applications? Well, static web applications are like, think of them as slides. They never change based on what you do. So, if you click on a link in a slide, another tab will open, but the slide itself will never change, right? So static web applications or web pages are basically just websites that never change. However, dynamic websites, or web applications as they're called, change based on what you click and other parameters such as the date, where you are, location, your microphone, certain data, etc. So React lets you create dynamic web applications, okay? And React helps you create stuff that's basically client side, which basically all of the React stuff or the React code happens in your browser, okay? If it was server-side, something like Flask is a server-side programming language, and that means that you basically control what happens on the server. Server meaning an arbitrary place that has some data in the cloud. So you can imagine it is like some random computer that you connect to. But React is a client-side language, which means that whatever you control what happens in the browser. So you control, okay, the user clicked a button and this is what's supposed to happen. You won't control this data was transferred. So that's what React is. And React is a declarative programming language. What does that mean? Well, let me show you an example. So there are two types of programming languages, especially in web and mobile world. Oops. There we go. So there are two types of programming languages. One is an imperative programming language, which basically means you tell the compiler or interpreter what to do and how to do it. So, for example, JavaScript is an imperative language, like pure JavaScript. So say we wanted like some code. So say we were trying to update some variable in JavaScript. So we would say x is 0, and we can then say x is 1, and then we would say, now this is not exactly JavaScript code that I'm going to write, I'm just going to write it in English. Update the page, go to a certain location, and insert the value of x into the inner HTML of the page. So that's imperative. Say we were to do it in React world, so declarative languaging or programming. So we can say, hey element, reference or take data from x, and before that, if we say x is 0 and now say x is 10,000, React is going to worry about changing that. So in imperative programming, we essentially say what to do and how to do it. In declarative programming, we say this is what we want, and we let React take care of how to do it. Okay, so it's much more direct. Okay, so what does a React application look like? Okay, So a React application is basically, you have components, and think of a component as like a building block. So the sole purpose of each component is to render something on the screen, or to basically show some UI. Okay, so think of them as like Lego blocks. So each component is a Lego block, and you can just like place them on the screen, right? And that's how a React app is constructed. And React depends on 3 libraries, okay, or 3 basic sources. So one is React itself, where we like get a lot of info from React. And then we have React DOM, which basically takes care of updating the DOM. Now what the hell is DOM? Well, DOM is the document object model. It basically defines what the page should look like. And you can think of it as like a tree. And so all the elements that are on the page are part of the DOM. So React DOM takes care of updating and rendering the DOM. And lastly, we use Babel. But why? So you heard me say at the start that React, it leans on JavaScript, right? That was a white lie, actually. It leans on JavaScript, but it uses something called JSX, which is like an extension of JavaScript. And the X standing for XML. So JSX has the sole difference that, say in JavaScript, you may want, say you have a variable, say you say its value is 2, and you have another variable whose value is high. In JSX, you can treat HTML elements as values. So I can say const some variable is like in h1, or if I want another variable that has a button. So in JSX, you essentially treat HTML elements as values of their own, okay? But browsers, unfortunately, cannot actually understand HTML elements, or they can understand HTML elements, but they really cannot understand JSX. So Babel takes care of transpiling, if you will, JSX into pure JavaScript. So that basically means converting this JSX code into pure JavaScript code that browsers can understand. Now this JavaScript code is like, it's ES6, so it's further transpiled into ES5 and so on and so forth for browsers to understand, like depending on the browser. Okay, so how does this translate into code? Well, let's actually see. So let's just create this simple HTML file that basically, it basically just says hello. So let's just write doctype HTML, and let's write so let's write an HTML tag. Now in the head, we're actually going to include, let's first give it a title. So let's just say hello. And now I'm actually going to go into a different file. And I'm going to copy some scripts. So these scripts are basically just, they're basically responsible for React, React DOM, and Babel. Now these are in CDN, so they're stored in the cloud. And you can just pretty much just copy paste them into your code. I'll paste the links into the description. And there we go. So we're done with our head. Let's create our body now. So now in our body, I'm going to create this div. whoops, not dialog. And our div, whoops, don't want to do that. So let's give this an ID of app. It's just an empty div, so it's an empty slate. Okay. So let's see how this renders. So I'll open it up on the screen. It's just a blank screen. So it's just a blank slate. So that's essentially where we're going to render stuff, okay? Now, let's create another script tag here. And let's give this so this has got this, it's a script. Whoops, typo. So it's a script tag, and basically it's a normal script tag, but it's got this special type attribute, and that's set to text/babel, so that, you know, whenever we write JSX, it translates to JavaScript. Now, in this script tag, we're going to write, so let's start. So this, we already said that React is basically a set of classes, right? So, or a set of components. So now what is a component in React? Well, a component is just a JavaScript class. And you can think of a JavaScript class as like a more advanced object, okay? And if you've done any object-oriented programming before, you would know exactly what a class is. Don't worry too much about it. I would say just use this syntax for now. So we're going to write this keyword class. Class hello. And we're going to write extends react.component. So now what does this mean? Why have we put in class hello? So we can see the name of the class is hello, and it extends react.component. Now what does that mean? Well, react.component is basically React's main class, right? And we're saying, okay, take all the features from react.component and add it to my hello class. And you can also say that, okay, my hello class is going to have all the features of react.component plus like some extra features, okay? And so we also said that each class is responsible for showing something on the screen, right? So the way we do that is by its render method. So the render method is essentially a function in the class, and so you just say render. You open up curly braces. And here, whatever we return are going to be what we want to show on the screen. So here we want to return like an h1 saying hello. So we can just say return. And here we can say h1. Whoops, there we go. And we can just say hello. There we go. So now you may also notice that I've enclosed, whoops, there we go. Whoops. So you may also notice that I've enclosed my return statement in parentheses. Well, I would say just do that for convenience sake and for, well, to keep good design, because as you go ahead and you have bigger and bigger return statements, you will have to enclose them in parentheses, because you wouldn't want to write all your tags on one line, right? So it looks really, really weird and hard to read. So essentially you can say return, and then you have this block with parentheses, and that contains what you want to return. Okay, so now we've defined what we want to show on the screen. But we've not said exactly where, or at least React doesn't know where. So let's tell it where. So just before this closing script, we have to write. So we use React DOM to render. So remember, so we say React DOM.render. So now we say React DOM.render, and it's a function. So we have to pass in two arguments. One is what do we want to render, and where do we want to render it. So we want to render the hello component. So just like, whoops. Whoops, there we go. So we want to return the hello component, right? So just like an HTML component, we can treat our hello class as an element. So we can say so we've said where we want to return it, and then our second argument would be where we want to put it. So that'll be in our div, right, with the ID of app. Now how do we do that? Well, turns out in JavaScript there's actually this function called document.querySelector, which basically lets you like select something in the document. So just how you select something in Word or Pages, you can just select or virtually select something in the document. So we can select this div with the ID of app by saying document. So document.querySelector. There we go. So we say document.querySelector, and in quotes we say pound app. Well, we just put pound because it's an ID, so we need to put pound there to kind of signify that it's an ID. Okay, so there we go. In a few lines we've defined our code. So let's see how this actually renders. And all right, so we've got our heading with hello. So wonderful. So we've got our first React app. And so in next lecture, we're actually going to be talking about how to nest components and how to use props. So yeah, see you next time. And if you have any doubts, you can just write it in the comment section or in the live chat when this goes premiere.